A wealthy executive mocked a local mechanic in front of her entire leadership team, but when he faced a problem her best engineers couldn't solve, the whole room froze. "Fix this machine, and I'll marry you." Her words cut through the boardroom like a dare, and Marcus Green, with hands stained in oil, didn't even flinch. At that moment the hook was set, because what happened next silenced every smirk in that room. Evelyn Carrington was known for control and certainty, for being the sharpest in every meeting, and yet across from her stood Marcus in worn boots and calloused hands, a man from a small-town garage surrounded by polished suits. The laughter was quiet but sharp. "Good luck with that," someone muttered. Another leaned back waiting for him to collapse under their doubt. But Marcus didn't break. He stepped forward calm but firm. "I didn't come here for jokes. I came because you've got a problem nobody else could fix." The air shifted, pens stopped moving, eyes turned toward him. Evelyn smirked with doubt dripping like poison. "So you're saying after 4 weeks of my brightest minds failing you can just walk in and solve it?" Marcus nodded once. "That's exactly what I'm saying." And suddenly the story turned, because sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who change everything. Have you ever been in that position, laughed at, doubted, underestimated, only to prove them wrong? Behind Marcus the prototype engine waited, the machine that drained millions and shattered reputations. Evelyn's voice cut the tension again. "All right then, Mr. Green, show us." The engineers leaned back smirking, ready to watch him fail, but Marcus walked to the machine with quiet confidence, toolkit in hand. "Machines all speak the same language," he said, locking eyes with the senior engineer. "Some of you just don't know how to listen yet." And that's when curiosity, dangerous, sharp, and unstoppable, began to stir inside Evelyn Carrington. She grew up in Canyon Mesa, Arizona, child of a math teacher and a mother working overnight shifts at the hospital. Money was never plentiful, no ballet lessons, no weekend getaways, just humming fluorescent lights in the kitchen and a family wagon coughing to life each morning. What set Evelyn apart wasn't privilege, it was hunger, a restlessness under her skin, a refusal to accept second place. She clawed her way into Desert State University, juggling 2 part-time jobs while studying engineering, and she learned fast. To win she had to be sharper, faster, harder than anyone else. Her first years at Lockwell Systems proved it. In boardrooms full of men who thought seniority made them untouchable, she didn't flinch. When her designs were dismissed, she stayed up until 3 in the morning and returned at dawn with work no one could ignore. Promotions came quickly, respect came slower, but Evelyn bulldozed through every wall. By her 30s she wasn't just climbing the ladder, she was pulling rungs out so no one else could follow. Then came Novatech, a company with impossible ambitions, next-gen power units and cleaner energy systems. They wanted someone relentless. Evelyn was their answer. By 42 she wore her reputation like armor. Investors loved her results, competitors hated her nerve, and employees feared her sharp words that cut deeper than she realized. To Evelyn it wasn't cruelty, it was efficiency, deliver results or get out of the way. So when someone suggested bringing in a garage mechanic to fix Novatech's failed prototype, she almost laughed. Her engineers had the best degrees, the finest training. If they couldn't solve it, what chance did a man from a small-town shop have? Her aide mentioned Marcus Green, and pride stopped her from saying no. Let him try, let him fail. In front of her team, his failure would prove her point. That was why she delivered the mocking line with such ease. It was theater, a reminder of who set the rules. But then Marcus pulled tools from his worn bag, and suddenly a memory flickered. Her father bent over the hood of their old car, grease on his hands, patience in his eyes, explaining the smallest parts like they were magic. She buried that memory quickly. Nostalgia had no place in her empire. What mattered was the spectacle, a lesson in hierarchy, a demonstration of power. Yet stages have a way of betraying the script, and the moment she built to prove her dominance might become the moment that rewrote her story forever. If Evelyn Carrington's life was measured in polished boardrooms and relentless deadlines, Marcus Green's life was measured in the grease-stained floor of a modest garage on the edge of Brookdale, Ohio. The shop sign was faded, the lot cracked, and the 2 waiting room chairs creaked with every visitor, yet for 3 generations that little shop had kept families moving mile after mile. Marcus grew up inside those walls. His earliest memories weren't cartoons or shiny toys. They were socket wrenches and the smell of motor oil, his grandfather humming gospel tunes while tuning an engine. By 10, he could change a tire faster than most adults. By 16, he could rebuild a carburetor with his eyes half closed. School was never where his fire burned. He didn't fail, but grades weren't his trophies. His real classroom was the garage, and the lessons were patience, precision, and pride in a job done right. Teachers urged him to dream bigger, but Marcus never saw keeping someone's old pickup alive as small work. To him it was dignity. After high school, he stayed in Brookdale, working side by side with his father to keep the shop alive. Life was far from easy. Bills stacked high, customers delayed payments, and some weeks he had to choose between tools or groceries, but quitting was never in his blood. He showed up every day solving problems others gave up on, and that was his gift. He didn't quit. It wasn't just engines. Neighbors leaned on him when a lawnmower sputtered, when a dirt bike refused to start, when a generator failed in a storm. Marcus listened, really listened. He never mocked someone who said it goes clunk clunk. He never brushed off a concern just because nothing obvious was wrong. He paid attention. That patience built trust, and trust is what changed his life. One day, a young Novatech engineer visiting family in Brookdale brought his cousin's car to the shop. 3 garages had failed to fix it. Marcus solved it in under an hour. But it wasn't just the fix that caught the engineer's eye. It was the way Marcus worked. Calm, methodical testing, listening, as if the machine spoke a language only he understood. "This guy thinks like an engineer but works like a craftsman," the man whispered to his supervisor. Marcus never expected what came next, a call from Novatech itself. Would he be willing to look at their malfunctioning prototype? His first reaction was disbelief. Why would a global tech firm call a grease-stained mechanic with no degree on the wall? But the voice on the other end wasn't joking, it was urgent. And against his doubts, Marcus said yes. The drive to Orion City was long and lean. He rode overnight in his pickup toolbox, rattling in the bed, catching sleep at rest stops to save money. By the time he rolled up to Novatech's headquarters, his boots were dusty, his shirt wrinkled, but his eyes were sharp. Walking through the sleek skyscraper, glass doors sliding open without a sound, marble floors shining like mirrors, Marcus felt the gulf between his world and theirs. And he felt the stares. People eyed his calloused hands, his worn clothes, the way he didn't belong. But he didn't shrink, not an inch. He had wrestled with machines older, dirtier, more stubborn than anything these engineers had ever touched. And that was Marcus Green's quiet truth. He wasn't there to impress. He wasn't there for applause. He was there because someone had asked for help, and helping, that was what he did best. Still, when Marcus stepped into that boardroom and heard the chuckles after Evelyn's mocking bet, he felt the sting, not because he doubted himself, but because he'd heard that same sound before. Teachers who assumed he wouldn't amount to much, customers who second-guessed him until their engines roared back to life, people who believed a diploma made them wiser than lived experience. This wasn't new. It was just another test, and tests didn't shake Marcus, they sharpened him. The prototype sat in the center of the room, more like a broken riddle than a breakthrough. Wires dangled like tangled vines, bolts scattered across the stand, and a faint scorch mark stretched across one panel, the scar of a failed trial. Evelyn Carrington folded her arms, her tone clipped. "Mr. Green, let's be clear. You're standing here because my assistant insists you have some unconventional approach. But remember this. This engine represents 4 years of research, hundreds of millions of dollars, and some of the brightest minds in the field. None of them could make it run. So forgive me if I'm not eager to place my faith in a man who changes brake pads for a living." A couple of engineers snickered. Marcus didn't look at them. He bent closer to the machine, fingertips tracing the wiring as if the prototype whispered secrets only he could hear, his calmness unsettling in a room charged with skepticism. "Replacing brake pads pays the bills," he finally said, lifting his eyes to Evelyn. "But don't confuse simple work with simple thinking. Machines don't care about resumes, they care about respect." The boardroom fell quiet. A younger engineer leaned forward, curiosity sparking in her eyes. Evelyn smirked, her voice dripping sarcasm. "Respect, that's your secret. I've got PhDs who couldn't solve this, and you're telling me all it takes is respect." Marcus tightened a wire and shrugged. Sometimes, yes, listening, watching, not rushing to prove how clever you are. The senior engineer with wire-rimmed glasses scoffed. This is absurd. He doesn't even know the schematics. He hasn't studied the programming. Marcus didn't answer him directly. Instead, he asked a question no one expected. When's the last time any of you actually checked the wiring harness instead of running another simulation? Silence. Evelyn arched an eyebrow. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Marcus replied evenly, that sometimes problems aren't complicated. Sometimes they're staring you right in the face, but you're too busy proving theories to notice. A ripple of discomfort passed through the engineers. Evelyn's jaw tightened, though the smirk stayed frozen on her lips. Then she threw out the line loud enough for everyone to hear. Fine then, if you can fix this engine here and now, I'll marry you. Gasps, suppressed laughter. A few engineers exchanged glances, unsure if she was serious. Her words carried that mocking edge that dared anyone to challenge her authority. Marcus straightened slowly, meeting her gaze. Careful what you promise, ma'am. Words have a way of circling back. The air in the room shifted. No one expected him to meet her with that kind of steady confidence. Evelyn tilted her head, still holding the stage. All right then, go on, impress us. Marcus drew a slow breath and knelt beside the prototype. From his worn toolkit he pulled the wrench, his movements deliberate, precise. In the back the young engineer whispered to a colleague, he's not even hesitating. The older man with glasses muttered, he's bluffing. He's going to humiliate himself. That was the whisper floating across the boardroom as Marcus bent over the machine. But as he tightened a bracket, corrected a loose connector, and carefully rerouted one of the wires, his focus never wavered. He didn't glance at the smirks, didn't react to the muttered doubts. He treated the prototype the same way he treated every broken-down car in his family shop back home, as if it deserved his full attention. For the first time a shadow of doubt flickered across Evelyn Carrington's face, and doubt was dangerous for someone who built her empire on certainty. Every eye followed Marcus as he crouched by the prototype. The hum of the air conditioning overhead seemed swallowed by silence. He pulled a small flashlight from his bag, angling the beam along the wiring. Too tight, he muttered. That's fighting against the current. The senior engineer leaned forward sharp. What is he even doing? He doesn't know the tolerances, he's guessing. Marcus didn't look up. Not guessing, he said evenly, watching. He loosened a clamp, shifted the wiring bundle, then tapped the housing with the back of his wrench. The hollow sound made his eyes narrow. Evelyn leaned back, arms folded, her voice mocking. What now, Mr. Green? Planning to knock on it until it answers you? Without missing a beat, Marcus replied, machines always talk. The question is whether you're listening. The words cut through the room like a knife. Even the younger engineers leaned closer, curiosity overtaking doubt. Marcus unscrewed a panel, exposing the intake manifold. His fingers traced the grooves until he stopped at a nearly invisible crack. Tilting the light across it, he pointed. Here's one of your problems. A fracture this small disrupts the pressure balance. The system chokes before it can stabilize. One engineer jumped up to see it for himself. How did we miss that? Marcus gave a small shrug. Because you were looking for something complicated. Sometimes the biggest failures hide behind the smallest flaws. The words landed heavier than he intended. Moving with quiet precision, Marcus replaced the fractured piece with a spare from the unused kit left by Novatech's own team. Then he rerouted the harness, securing the wires neatly away from the housing. His hands moved with steady confidence. No wasted motions, no rush. Evelyn tapped her pen on the table, her voice sharp. Even if you're right about the crack, that doesn't explain why the software kept failing during startup. Marcus wiped his hands with a rag, straightening. Because the system was receiving signals it couldn't process. The wiring was misaligned with the sensor feed. Whoever installed this routed it against the housing. It threw off the timing. The computer couldn't make sense of what it was reading. The room went still. He stepped back, gesturing toward the engineers. Power it up. The senior engineer scoffed. It won't matter, we've tried this 100 times. Marcus stayed calm. Then one more won't hurt. Evelyn raised a brow, her smirk already crafting the cutting remark for when it failed. All right then, start it. One of the younger engineers pressed the control pad. The room filled with the familiar sputter, the cough, the stall, the high whine they had all come to expect. Evelyn's smirk deepened. She opened her mouth to speak. But then the sound shifted. The cough evened out, the whine steadied, the prototype roared into a low, smooth rhythm, strong and consistent. Gasps erupted across the room, eyes widened. Engineers who had spent sleepless weeks failing to stabilize the system now stared at the engine in disbelief. "It's running," one of them whispered almost in awe. "It's actually running." Evelyn's smirk vanished. Her pen froze mid-tap. Marcus stood with his arms folded, calm, steady, watching the engine hum. All it needed, he said quietly, was someone willing to listen. The machine purred on, smooth and alive, mocking every doubt that had filled the room. Engineers crowded closer, checking readings, confirming stability. One turned toward Evelyn, eyes wide. "It's fixed completely." For a long stretch no one spoke. Then Marcus broke the silence, his voice even. "I told you degrees don't fix machines. Respect does." Evelyn's eyes locked on him, her confidence shaken for the first time in years. She had built her empire on control, on being the sharpest person in the room. But here before her team, the man she mocked had succeeded where her best minds had failed, and sometimes the silence after victory is louder than victory itself. The engine's steady rhythm filled the boardroom, every pulse a reminder this wasn't an illusion, it was real. The dam broke. Engineers who had rolled their eyes now swarmed the prototype, scanning diagnostics, comparing readouts, shaking their heads in disbelief. "It's holding steady. Voltage is balanced. This shouldn't be possible." The senior engineer with wire-rimmed glasses muttered it under his breath, not just disbelief but shame. Marcus didn't gloat, didn't grin, didn't throw their doubt back at them. He simply stood back, composed. For him this wasn't about humiliating anyone, it was about doing the work right. For Evelyn it was different. Her gaze stayed fixed on the machine, her mind racing. Every instinct urged her to reclaim control, to remind everyone who held authority, but she couldn't, not when the proof stood undeniable and alive. One of the younger engineers turned to Marcus. "How did you see it so quickly?" Marcus gave a faint smile. "Machines don't lie. People do. People complicate things, but a machine always tells the truth if you're patient enough to listen." The words landed hard. Several engineers exchanged glances as if hearing a lesson they should have learned years ago. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "You make it sound so simple." Marcus looked straight at her. "Simple doesn't mean easy. That's where most people get it wrong." Silence settled again. For the first time Evelyn felt her authority slipping, not because anyone had turned against her, but because respect was flowing toward the man she had dismissed. Her stomach knotted. She despised the feeling, yet underneath the discomfort something else stirred, a memory of being underestimated, laughed at, the hunger that once drove her to prove everyone wrong. Now she was on the other side, and the irony wasn't lost on her. The senior engineer cleared his throat, trying to redirect. "Well, clearly this input is valuable. Perhaps Mr. Green could consult with us further." But the words sounded hollow. Everyone knew this wasn't just input, it was a revelation. Marcus nodded once. "I'll help where I can, but let's be clear, this wasn't luck, it was attention. You'd be surprised how much you can solve when you put pride aside long enough to listen." A few heads lowered, pens scribbled notes as though trying to capture wisdom no textbook had ever given them. Evelyn's throat felt dry. She wanted to snap, to remind everyone she was still the CEO, still the one signing their checks, but the words stuck, because deep down she knew this moment wasn't about hierarchy. It was about truth, and truth is a difficult opponent, especially when it stares you straight in the face. And truths rarely stop at being acknowledged, they demand change. When the meeting finally adjourned, the boardroom didn't clear the way it normally did. Engineers lingered, huddled around the prototype, whispering, replaying every moment. For once they weren't debating equations or dissecting graphs, they were reflecting on how Marcus Green had shifted their world in less than an hour. Evelyn stayed in her chair at the head of the table, her pen lying forgotten on the polished wood. Her mind, usually sharp and unyielding, felt uncharacteristically heavy. She replayed her own words in her mind, the mocking tone, the reckless bet tossed like a weapon, the laughter that followed, and then the silence when Marcus proved her wrong. She glanced at him as he packed his tools. No smug grin, no swagger, just steady hands placing everything back in its place. The kind of man who didn't need to say, "I told you so." The work spoke louder than pride ever could. Finally she broke the silence. "Mr. Green." He looked up calm as ever. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice wavered, a crack in the armor she had worn all day. "I underestimated you." Marcus tilted his head slightly, then gave a faint half-smile. "You wouldn't be the first." The answer stung more than a rebuke. She realized how many times people like him had been ignored, mocked, written off, not because they lacked skill, but because people like her never looked beyond the surface. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. "What you did today, you embarrassed me." A few engineers froze, bracing for another strike, but Evelyn continued, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard. "Not because you made me look small, but because you reminded me how small I was acting." Silence fell again. Engineers exchanged glances, surprised by the honesty in her tone. Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes the hardest engines to fix aren't the ones on the table." The words cut deeper than she expected. Evelyn didn't apologize, not publicly, not yet, but something inside her shifted. The sharpness she wore like armor cracked just enough to let humility slip through. As Marcus walked out of the boardroom, toolbox in hand, the young engineer who had been watching so intently called after him, "Mr. Green, thank you." He turned, gave a single nod, and left. He didn't just leave behind a working prototype, he left behind a lesson none of them would forget. Evelyn remained long after the others had filed out. She sat staring at the machine, its steady vibration echoing through the floor. It wasn't just running, it was teaching. Teaching her that titles, money, and degrees meant little if you stopped listening. Later, when the board gathered to discuss the next steps, Evelyn stunned them. She didn't begin with projections or investor metrics. Instead, she opened with a sentence no one expected. "Sometimes the answers we need don't come from the top. They come from the places we're too proud to look." The room shifted. Some engineers nodded, others sat stunned, but all of them felt the weight of her words. And that is the real story. It wasn't about a mechanic repairing an engine. It was about pride colliding with humility, about respect proving stronger than arrogance, about remembering that greatness doesn't always wear a suit or carry a degree. Marcus Green walked into that boardroom as the man nobody believed in. He walked out as the man who reminded them all that patience and respect are the tools that fix more than machines. They fix people too. And that's the lesson. Never dismiss someone's work just because it doesn't look like yours. The person you overlook today might be the very one who saves you tomorrow when everything feels like it's falling apart. So think about the people around you, the ones you pass by, the ones you underestimate, the ones you assume don't have the answers. Show them respect. Listen to them. Have you ever experienced something like this? Let us know in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. And if this story made you stop and think, share it with someone who needs the reminder, because sometimes the truth that changes everything comes from the place you least expect.